First of all, I wanted to welcome you and just remind folks that have come in a little bit late. We are recording today's session um, so that we can share it with other folks who have an interest in learning what you all will learn today. What we'll go over today is we'll share a little bit about Washington Farmland Trust and what we do. We'll share about the Delta Farm, the sale process, conservation easements, just a brief overview of conservation easements, and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife's role as a conservation easement holder. And we'll leave plenty of time for questions. I did notice in the poll that there were just a couple of folks that had an interest in asking questions, but I'm assuming that after we review all of this information, there may be a few more. So we'll take as much time as we need to for that. We'll start with an introduction of Washington Farmland Trust colleagues and staff, and then we'll shift to invite our real estate broker to make an introduction. I'll go ahead and start. And if you just want to introduce your name and your title at the trust and then your role as it relates to Delta Farm, that would be great. I'm Libby Reed, the Conservation Easement Stewardship Manager at Washington Farmland Trust. And I have been leading the partner and community engagement effort with regards to the Delta Farm. Nicole?
Hi, everyone. Nicole Warren. I am also a stewardship manager at Washington Farmland Trust. I manage the properties that we own, so my role, is both in day property management, and oops, sorry, I think my video popped off for a second. And also kind of the direct person who's managing the sale itself in collaboration with my team. So pass it to you, Robin.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Thanks everyone for taking time to be here with us. My name is Robin Fay. I'm the Conservation and Stewardship Director at the Trust. So I lead our conservation and stewardship programs for our work across the state. In this context, for the Delta Farm, that has meant supporting Libby in her work, communicating and connecting with all of you out in the community, and supporting Nicole in everything she's been doing to manage the property and get us lined up towards an eventual sale process. Thanks again for taking the time to be here.
And we'll pop to the next slide. Teresa, we still don't have you on camera, which is okay, but I'll invite you now to introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with my video, but I'm Teresa Patton with CBRE. I've been with CB for about 29, 30 years, and I've worked with Washington Farmland Trust with various services since about 2009, I believe.
Great. Thanks so much, Teresa.
You're welcome.
So I'll invite Robin to say a few words, I think, yeah, for this next slide. If you have questions along the way, just drop them in the chat. We may hold on to those questions until the very end, and I'll do all the collecting along the way. Robin, take it away.
Yeah, thanks. So some of you may already be familiar with Washington Farmland Trust and our programs, but I wanted to provide a brief overview for anyone who might not be. Washington Farmland Trust is a 501c3 nonprofit land trust, which means we work using primarily public grant funds to conserve working farmland and work to ensure it remains farmland into the future. We have three core program areas that are represented here. um, conservation, stewardship, and the farm to farmer program. The conservation work is largely us working with um, landowners to identify high priority farmland that's also threatened and an opportunity for conservation, and to secure again typically public grant funding to purchase conservation easements that protect farmland from development. Occasionally, if purchasing an easement is not an option, we buy the land itself, as was the case with this property back in the day. Um, and then typically lease it to a farmer until we can transition its ownership to a new farmer. The stewardship program is everything that comes after either placing a conservation easement on a farm or purchasing a farm. It's all the work partnering with landowners where we hold easements and with tenants where we own the land to ensure the land is that's been conserved stays protected. It includes managing the land we own, like this property, working with tenants, managing leases, infrastructure, maintenance, and then also stewarding easements that we hold to ensure that the terms of those agreements are upheld over time. The farm to farmer program aims to help farmers find land, build capacity, access resources, and ultimately thrive as business owners and stewards of the land that they farm. Farm to Farmer offers personalized support to both current and aspiring farmers, as well as farming collectives and cooperatives, farm organizations, and farmland owners. So, as you can, I think, see in this graphic, the three programs all work closely together, and they all work to keep farmland in production and farmers thriving. And I think some of the differences are that whereas the conservation and stewardship work is often shaped by the land itself and the existing landowner and the opportunity that might exist there to do conservation. Farm to farmer really starts by building relationships with clients and then working with them to support their goals and their business um, as they grow it or evolve it. So that's kind of the the overview, and I'll have a chance a little bit later in the presentation to dive back into the conservation and stewardship work a little bit more. And now though, I'll pass it to Nicole.
All right. I'm just gonna kind of give a bit more information about the sale and a little bit more about the property. I know that a lot of folks that are on the call have varying levels, but I think some familiarity already. So I'll share some details, and then what I don't cover too, if there's more questions, we'll definitely have time to dig into that. If you wouldn't mind, yeah, great. So just this first slide, given where you all are calling in from too, it's probably clear that a lot of you know where it is. But in Squim on Town Road. So the property is 73 acres. About 64 of those acres, give or take, are tillable. There's some wetland and creek habitat on the property in addition to that. And then some area where there's kind of the main infrastructure in the house itself and that developed area. If you've had a chance to see the listing, you'll see the price that it's listed at right now, which is the appraised value that we got for the property initially. So that's how we got to the listing price. And you may have more questions about that too. So that's something that we can talk through as well in the Q&A session. And there is a conservation easement on the property. That is something we'll also dig into a little bit too tonight. And the easement holder is the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we'll kind of share a little bit more about what that role looks like as well. Next slide. Yeah, so just like a little bit of maybe some detail about the property itself. There is a farmhouse on the property. it's gone through a lot of transitional phases, and so but that's the size of it too, just 1,700 square feet. So there's that farmhouse. One of the biggest, I think, like infrastructure pieces is that there's a really big, over 100-year-old main barn that's a little over 10,000 square feet. And then there's several smaller barns, and an open bay structure. So there's quite a bit of infrastructure on the property. Um, and then the water is unique in that there is a well that's been there for a long time, that does supply the house and several of the barns with water. But the irrigation system is separate to that. It and is connected to the Dungeness Irrigation District. So that project was a pretty big project that happened around 2005. So that supply comes in, and there is a irrigation pond on the property, and from there, pump an electrical system that then sends it out to the underground main line through the agricultural fields. So that's kind of just a general overview of what the irrigation and the water rights attached for irrigating the ag land is also connected to the irrigation district. Some of you probably know a variety of ways this property's been used over the last 25 or so years. But different at different times it was iterations of veg, and then in more recent years primarily grain, with some livestock production too. So, we can share more about that. Um, there are sort of soil maps to point to for the property, but what we learn more from the folks that farmed it for a long time is that there's quite a complexity of sort of how the different soil types interact through the fields. So there's definitely a landscape with that, but in general, really good soils, high yielding. And like I mentioned briefly at the beginning, there is quite a bit of wetlands also on the property that sort of connect to the headwaters of Meadowbrook Creek, that does drain into the Dungeness River. So that is a pretty important sort of connection to the waterway there. Yeah, so just kind of wanted to highlight a few different pieces if you're not familiar yet with some of the details and workings of what's on the property. And then just wanted to briefly share this, and Teresa too. I can go through this a little bit, and I invite you if you have anything else you want to share or offer up. So, sort of something unique that we're doing right now is this listing period, which you'll find on all of our information. We'll share a link if you haven't seen it yet to the sort of landing page that we created on our website that speaks in a little bit more detail to what this is. Also, it's explained in the FAQ that we created about the property as well. But from starting in April when we listed the property and going all the way into August, we're doing what we're calling a listing period, which during that time we're marketing the property, but we're not reviewing offers and applications yet. So we're trying to allow the space and time for folks to explore what's possible for them, what might be financially feasible, and take some time they need, so they don't feel like they immediately need to rush and submit an offer right away. This gives a little bit more time for folks. Yeah. And the details kind of here with some of the dates, but we will wait until August 17th to start reviewing offers and applications that have been submitted. So, this definitely came together with hearing some feedback from partners and community members that we've been in communication with and working with, and just that we're committed to an intentional process and working to find the right buyer, and really wanting to bring the land back into production. And that's the goal. So just kind of a little bit of information that's listed here about the offer and application process. If you are interested and have questions, want to learn more about next steps, maybe you want to tour the property, definitely reaching out to our broker is the best next step. Working with her and exploring some different things, that's what she's there for, and who you'll submit an offer with if you're interested. We have created an application to learn a little bit more about who you are and to help us in our process of selecting a buyer. So yeah, if you do reach out and make an offer, we will reach out to you to coordinate next steps through that process. So yeah, and again, kind of just like I said, if there's things that are coming up right now as you're reading through this and you have questions, that's why we created this event. That's why we're here to answer some more questions for you. And just to throw this on here, and I can follow up with giving you the slides to this so you have all this information. But our broker contacts here, it's also on our website, and that she is working oh, and I see your video is working now. That's great, Teresa. So sorry that was that you were struggling with that, but yeah, so Teresa is working to kind of schedule some tours. And so there's a current date right now that I listed here by appointment, but also if you're interested in a tour or maybe that date doesn't work, but you want to find another one, reach out to Teresa and she'll find a time for you to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, right now on June 19th, I'm planning from about 12 to 3. So if there's other times like living or
Teresa, I think we've lost you.
Paul said, you can't make that time, just
Teresa, I think your audio was delayed a little bit. Would you mind just dropping the times that you will be there on the 19th in the chat so folks know? Thank you. Robin, I think you're up next.
It's me again. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about conservation easements in general in an effort to kind of put this property in context and the easement on this property in context. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. This information can be dry and very technical, but is really important to understand if you're considering buying property with an easement on it. And so I want to present it in as clear a way as possible and welcome any questions when we get to the Q&A that could help make it any clearer. Conservation easements are a really important part of how we and other land conservation organizations do their conservation work. They are legally binding agreements between whoever the landowner is and whoever that organization is that's going to hold the easement. Oftentimes we're that easement holder and we're working with a private landowner. In this case, when the future of this property for farming was threatened way back 25 years ago, entering into an easement with the previous owner was not really an option in that moment. And so, as I mentioned earlier, this is an example where we purchased the property outright and have been the landowner ever since, and have worked, after purchasing, worked with Department of Fish and Wildlife to put an easement in place. So in this case, we are the landowner, Department of Fish and Wildlife is the easement holder, and that easement that they hold will transfer with the property. Easements are typically permanent. Conservation easements, that is, are typically perpetual and go with the deed of the property in perpetuity. So that easement will transfer with the property when we sell it. And Department of Fish and Wildlife will continue their role as easement holder. So again, the easement is at its core, it's a legally binding agreement between the landowner and the whatever entity is holding the easement that ensures the property stays conserved into the future. Any conservation easement is going to outline restrictions for how the property can be used. And it also outlines roles for the landowner and the land trust, or in this case, Department of Fish and Wildlife, whoever that entity is that holds the conservation easement. It will outline roles for both parties who each typically have responsibilities outlined in the easement for ensuring that the terms of the easement are upheld over time. One other note about easements, easements can also lower the value of property. They typically do, since it can no longer be developed into the future. Any unused development rights or development potential that exists on the property, we can all think of farms we've seen, subdivided and developed into residential housing or other uses. Typically, a conservation easement will remove that development potential permanently, and therefore bring the value of the property down going forward. This does not guarantee the land will be affordable, and we see that in this case with such a high appraised value. It does not mean that the land will be cheap or affordable, but it does typically mean that the land is less expensive than it would have been if the easement were not there. In this case, since we are not the easement holder and that is Department of Fish and Wildlife, if you want to really drill down into the details of this easement, we would encourage you to reach out to Department of Fish and Wildlife in their role as the easement holder. They're going to be the definitive authority on the easement terms and interpretation of those easement terms. And I believe we can share contact info for our contact at Department of Fish and Wildlife a little bit later in the presentation. I think I will leave. There we go. Yeah, I think it's perfect timing because I think I'll leave it at that for now, and I'm happy to come back to any of these points when we get to the Q&A.
All right. Thanks, Robin. I'm gonna jump in here. Robin has mentioned it once already, but after a conservation easement gets put on the land, that's when the stewardship role starts. And so I may repeat some of the things that Robin's talked about, but it's in an effort to really just emphasize these important points that from our perspective as a land trust with regards to owning land with a conservation easement. So when a land trust commits to protecting land, we make a forever commitment to care for it and assume a legal obligation to uphold restrictions on it. And the same can be said for an agency or government entity that holds the easement. As we said before, Washington Farmland Trust owns the land in the case of the Delta Farm, but does not hold the easement. The Department of Fish and Wildlife is the grantee on the conservation easement on Delta Farm. What that means is that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has the enforcement rights to make sure that the terms of the conservation easement are upheld. And the future owner of Delta Farm will work with the Department of Fish and Wildlife for future stewardship monitoring visits and to discuss what activities are permitted uses and what limitations there may be on things like maintaining and building infrastructure or increasing impermeable surface, like adding gravel. or maintaining and managing agricultural fields and habitat areas. Easements, even though they are legal documents, inherently contain terms that require interpretation. And while some terms in an easement are very clear, others are less so. That means it would be difficult for Washington Farmland Trust to speak to or answer really specific questions. Sorry about that. Really specific questions about the easement on Delta Farm. As Robin said, we'll be sharing a little bit more about the contact at the Department of Fish and Wildlife in a moment, and we'll share sort of the best way to receive that person's contact information if you have specific questions. But I think the last point that we wanted to make with regards to conservation easement stewardship is that, like all of you know who are farmers out on the land right now, the reality of working lands is that they're very complex places. It's really difficult and to balance human, economic, and ecological systems on the land. We can share that in more recent years, the conservation easement terms on Delta Farm were in conflict with the changing management practices on the property. The resulting action was that the Department of Fish and Wildlife issued an easement violation. In the case of the violations on Delta Farm, ultimately the farmland owner is responsible, and Washington Farmland Trust, as the owner of the land, is now working to remediate an area where the violation occurred. The violations will be fully resolved before closing on a sale of the property. Violations can happen for different reasons, but strong communication and a commitment to working together usually has a positive result. Strong communication is a place where solutions can be found to address and resolve violations, or to simply better understand the terms of an easement. And this is just an important point that I'll echo that Robin stated. From our perspective as a land trust, it's essential for a farmland owner or a prospective farmland owner to ask questions and confer with the organization or entity that holds the easement. We encourage all of you to not make assumptions about what is or is not allowable, even if you think you might know what the response will be. Because easements require interpretation in some way, the past is not always a good indicator of the future, especially if you would be new to the land and new to working with the entity that holds the easement. There may be questions about this as well, so add them to the chat. Once we've exited from the presentation, I'll make sure to gather all those questions. And but for now, let's move ahead one slide and introduce you, at least virtually, to the gentleman who is the land agent at the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and will continue the stewardship role for the Department of Fish and Wildlife at the Delta Farm. The best way to get in contact with Chad is by reaching out first to Teresa. She can share Chad's information. Nicole, I'll ask if you want to, you can drop it in the chat as well, if that seems like a good way forward. So we've been talking for quite a few minutes at this point, and I can see that there have been a few things put in the chat. We do want to shift to a question and answer session. And as we do so, I just want to note that we do have some contact information towards the end of the session. I'll just post one more slide so that you can visually see some contact information. And once we shift into the question and answer session, I'll drop links into the chat for the landing page and a few other things. So, Robin, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, thanks, Libby. And thanks to everyone else on the line just for sticking with us through a lot of dense information. A really big part of why we wanted to host this was to answer your questions. So please, if you haven't already, feel free to drop questions in the chat. We'll do our best to answer on the spot, but some questions may be beyond the scope of this venue, and if we can't give you a full answer on the spot, we'll be sure to follow up in writing. So I have not been tracking the chat, but I'm happy to jump into answering questions. Libby, let's see.
Yeah,
Did you want to?
I'm going to go ahead and actually just give folks a few minutes to add questions to the chat if any come up. I'm going to just give folks a minute to look at this information before we formally close the presentation and just join each other back in the Zoom room. It does look like Kelly, do you have a question? Feel free.
Hi, I do have a few questions that came to mind. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Henwood. I'm with the WCU Extension Regional Small Farms Program in Clallam, Jefferson, and Kitsap County, and I've been supporting WFT with this transition project by getting the word out to farmers. A couple of questions. It's sort of like a three-part question. So the first one is there any known history or is there any history of known soil-borne pathogens on the farm that could be an issue for a farmer such as clubroot or white root rot? The second question is, what is the status of the water quality on both the water uses, so both the well and the irrigation? I know that irrigation district or I think they do some testing. So, but I'd love to hear any more about the water. And then the third question is the farm enrolled in the open space ag tax exemption? And if so, what are the responsibilities of an oncoming landowner or buyer to ensure the smooth transition of that?
Thanks, Kelly.
We can start from the top. I don't know the answer to your question about soil-borne pathogens, but that is something that I can try to find out to see what my plan to is if we have questions we couldn't answer, then I will plan to kind of write a written response and then I can send it to everybody out to everybody who joined. So yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know some of that history. So let me look into that and I can get back to you on that one. Water quality piece. The well that is for the house and barns, I don't think that's been tested in quite a while. It's something that we've kind of been looking into to just see and like get a more recent test done and kind of just make sure that everything looks good. I don't think that anything's been like flagged for concerns for that over the years, but certainly a good thing to do, just due diligence wise. And then yeah, the water, as far as I know, kind of just like Dungeness Irrigation District does do some testing related to that, and that would just be an interesting thing to think about a little bit. Just kind of as I mentioned, just how the system is set up. Is their water's coming in through their pipeline? Then we have the irrigation pond on the property and then pumping out of that. Um, so just kind of looking into like there's sort of multiple pieces of that if it's of interest or concern to make sure of. So yeah, sorry to not have like a more ton of detail on those pieces, but I think especially, there's some things we can look into there, and I think some due diligence that kind of comes with these next steps of holding the property and then working in negotiation with a potential buyer to see if there's anything of concern there. And then, of course, just in our sort of negotiation phase with like once we're in a purchase and sale negotiation, we will, anything that's happening will be and has gone on will be disclosed in that process too. So like really transparent and communicative of anything we do know about any of the water quality or environmental conditions on the property. Do you want to take that third one, uh, Robin or Libby?
The
Just
open space.
understanding the open space enrollment and just I think what I heard was responsibilities or probably how does that open space need to be upheld for the potential buyer or new landowner?
Yeah, hopefully this answers your question. Typically, if the new buyer intends to keep the property in open space, then there's a form that's filled out at closing through the escrow process, a continuance form that basically lets the county know the property is transferring ownership, but that the status is going to continue. Sometimes you have to provide a little bit documentation about that, just sort of indicating what the future farming or sort of what your plans are, but typically not any significant amount of detail. And then that form gets submitted to the county along with all the other paperwork for recording and transferring the ownership. And then the new owner would have all the same responsibilities for just maintaining that tax status by demonstrating that they're qualified for the program, that their continued operation on the property qualifies for the terms of the program. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are more questions for farmers because I know that in the past, some farmers, when this transfer happens, there's just a confusion around the process and who's responsible. So we don't want anyone to have to pay back taxes or come with a surprise. So I guess it's just sort of part of the due diligence of both parties, but more so the incoming landowner. And then can I make just one more comment? Nicole, when you were talking about the irrigation district, it would be really great to get in connection with the Dungeness Irrigation District. It sounds like you already have, but they just had a meeting with all of the irrigation districts in the area for this coming season's drought. We're going into the fourth year of drought, so the flow rate and the water allotment is going to be pretty drastically reduced for farmers, right, this year. So just part of the due diligence of what to expect for folks if they come onto the property and they don't have water because of our drought. So I don't know if you want to add to that or if there's been any conversation with them about that.
Thanks for flagging that. Yeah, that we haven't been reached out to about any of those sort of recent changes or decisions around how the allotment might change. So that is something to look into and understand a little bit more. Yeah.
Happy to help make that connection if needed.
Awesome. Thanks.
Kelly. I can also try and tackle a couple more of these on the list in the chat if that's helpful.
That's great, Robin. Thanks.
Yeah, at this time, we do not have the exact makeup of the application selection committee finalized. It will almost certainly include myself and Nicole, and then at least one other person um, from our conservation and stewardship team. And that may depend a little bit on who has there are a handful of folks who role-wise could serve in that capacity and have the appropriate expertise. It may depend a little bit on capacity. That will likely be a pretty concentrated kind of crunch of work sometime after that August 17th date. And so we'll need to figure out kind of who as we get closer to that time, who's going to have the capacity to help us in that role. Hopefully that helps.
Follow-up question with that. Would Chad Buck or somebody from that department be a part of the committee representing that point of view? The wildlife point of view?
No, I don't believe so. I think
Okay.
selecting a buyer is really the grantee of the easement doesn't really have a role in that decision. So that will be Washington Farmland Trust's decision.
Okay.
Great question though. The question about whether Department of Fish and Wildlife holds other ag easements, they don't hold a lot. I can't say for certain this is literally the only one they hold, but they don't hold many. This is a small part of what they do. They own a lot of land outright and manage it in that way, and that's more typically the way they have shown up around the state as a conservation entity. And then I thought maybe was there another?
Might add to that just briefly,
Yeah.
Robin. Yeah, I think the way that Department of Fish and Wildlife or like Fish and Game in other states, I think you might see a fluctuation in terms of like what their role is as like a state agency in the type of easements that they hold. So in Washington State, I definitely you do see them holding a lot more with like wetland and sort of protected areas like that, as a lot of the types of easements that they hold in addition to like owning property. So I think they do hold in Washington State, they do hold less that are like more strictly ag land related. It was a really unique partnership that came about at sort of the right time and funding was available. And the property was actually originally around 100 acres. And so, as part of sort of the floodplain restoration and some protection of habitat, we actually sold some of that acreage to support that project. That's sort of right along in connectivity there with the river and adjacent property. So that was part of how that came about, and they also had a vision and wanted to see the ag land protected. So just to give a little bit of context about how we got there, and it was 2002 that easement closed, so it was quite a while ago as well.
Libby, this is Teresa. I'm using two computers here, one for sound, one for video, but I just had a couple of comments to add on to what Robin had said, just for a couple of clarifications. Earlier, someone had asked about testing of the well and the irrigation system. In the event that Washington Farmland Trust doesn't take on those activities or what have you, under a purchase and sale contract, when we get to that point, we do expect that a buyer would have a contingency period. So if there's some of those activities that you would like to perform, you would have, time to complete those type of tests or other types of studies and things that you feel like you need to make a good decision. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that there would be enough time to do those sorts of things. And then in addition, I had just another comment on the egg classification. Sometimes when when buyers purchase conserved land that is in an ag classification with the assessor, they think that those just go hand in hand. If you buy conservation ground, it's automatically in the ag classification. And as Robin mentioned, it is a process that's transferred at closing, that the assessor does approve. It's not a lengthy process or anything like that, but it's the ag classification is an ongoing process that the property owner will have to continue to provide information to the assessor to remain in that classification. It's either every 3 or 5 years. It's a simple form that says something to the effect of, yes, we're farming it in corn and we are we make this general profit on it. It's nothing in depth or anything, but it is a form you have to fill out every 3 or 5 years and send it to the assessor, or you do run the risk of falling out of that classification. So I just wanted to be clear on that, because people get confused, which I think it is confusing. Why is it they don't just go hand in hand, but they don't. So
Thanks for that, Teresa.
sure.
Is there anything else you'd like to add at this time?
Not for me. Thank you.
Okay. How about other folks? Are there any other questions you'd like to raise?
So I don't, this isn't in the form of a question. Those will need to go to Chad. But my concern is that if the conservation easement is being held by the Fish and Wildlife Department, there's not the understanding, the depth of understanding that there would be if it was held by the Washington Farmland Trust or another agricultural trust. And so there may be things, I know for me, if I were to buy the farm, there would be adjustments to some of those conditions that would be best, that research shows would be best for the health of the soil in both the natural areas and the agricultural areas. But that would need to be understood. And yeah, and so going into something like this with the not feeling sure that would happen, and then being limited in my ability to farm the land in the way, very regeneratively, in a way that's creating the healthiest soil possible and the most resilient soil for the area, is a concern. It's a major concern.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that concern. I want to just give a brief moment. I'm not sure if Robin or Nicole want to speak to this. I can also.
Yeah, I absolutely understand the concern that you're sharing. I think yeah, I think, and I defer to Nicole or Libby if they have a different perspective, certainly, but I think any specific, any as much as you could provide, I think, concrete questions to Chad, I think probably asking those questions of the agency would be most helpful, and might not fully assuage your concerns, but I think would be helpful in getting a sense of how those conversations would go with Department of Fish and Wildlife, and whether you feel like having those conversations would give you the level of confidence or detail that you feel like you need to then feel like you would, be able to continue having those conversations as time went on, as management changed, or as your, practices changed. Yeah, that's not a super concrete answer, but I think that would be my perspective. I'm curious, Nicole or Libby, if you feel free to weigh in if you feel like I'm off base on that one.
No, I think that's great, Robin. I was just going to add, I mean, this is part of why discussion like this is really helpful, and to hear what folks' concerns are, to see what we can look towards to now, what we can sort of discover now and find out that will help us. I think that through the time on the property as well, we have worked with a lot of partners. Like the Conservation District has been huge in partnering, for many, many years, and knows so much about like the history of the property and supporting, just the environmental conditions and different practices. And so, I think part of it too is continuing to bring partners along that can help, share and provide sort of an understanding of like what you want to do and how it fits in and how it makes sense. And yeah, I want to say that like a piece of our role, I feel like, for who that next landowner is making sure that we transition all of those relationships, and get folks off to the best start that we can, for sharing like the historical knowledge that we know, for like sharing the partners who have been involved to help steward the property, and those relationships. And so that is something that we're very committed to as well. And I think these are going to be really good questions for Fish and Wildlife, so that, and hopefully can get some answers while we're in this process, so that we're also here to say, hey, here's what we're seeing, connecting. I'm just going to mention again, just their great farm planner at Clallam Conservation District that's worked with the farm for over 20 years. That can, I think, really help sort of demonstrate and share that understanding of, here are the practices and here is why they help to improve soil and water quality, and like how they fit in. I hope that helps give a little bit more confidence too, but I think you know asking some of these questions is going to be really helpful for both our all under like bringing what we can sort of understand together and bring along, but also, like Robin said, to just like help whoever that potential buyer is to build confidence in making sure that it aligns with like how they want to steward the property and that it makes sense for them. And I think just acknowledging that it does feel a little bit tricky, knowing that like we will be stepping away and that we aren't the easement holder, which on most of our properties we are the easement holder. So that makes this a unique situation for sure, and just want to like acknowledge that and recognize that.
At the Conservation District, is that Kim who's been doing?
Um, Not Kim. Why is my mind all of a sudden? Jennifer Bond is our main contact.
Okay.
Kim's great, but is more the I think district manager. So
Right.
Kim knows a lot about the property too, and has been really involved in a lot of the habitat and water quality work, sort of
Mhm.
all that connectivity around there. So has a lot of knowledge about that as well. But Jen has been the direct farm planner for over 20 years, and
Okay.
kind of knows the ins and outs of so much that's happened on that property. And like, for instance, led the irrigation project even back in 2005 when that was designed and put together. And so, yeah, she's great, and
Okay.
an awesome resource. And I even was out at the property with her a couple months ago. And so we just had a conversation about how she's like very willing to answer questions for folks too,
Mhm.
and get connected if it's helpful for, kind of learning more, or if there's other questions that might be like specific to the, resource management. Yeah, that she just is someone who's also willing to be a resource as well. So,
Okay. Thank you.
yeah.
And I just want to note the time, and that we've already taken up a good portion of your evening. But just wanted to just mention briefly that for those of you on the call that may have questions, that you're more comfortable just asking directly, please reach out to Teresa if it regards the Delta Farm sale. You can also reach out to Nicole. Nicole and Teresa are coordinating very closely. And so we can follow up on any additional questions that get answered there. And I just wanted to take a moment. I know Kelly has hopped off, but we have been coordinating with agricultural organizations in the Dungeness on this project from the beginning, and are just deeply grateful for their partnership. In addition, we are grateful for the engagement of and communication between some of the folks on this call and just the community in general. Your continued questions and curiosity about the process and the farm and elevating your concerns really have informed us along the way, and we're grateful to you for that. So don't stop reaching out. Nicole's information is here. It sounds like she'll be sharing this slide deck with you so that you have access to that information. And thank you so much for your time this evening. It's nice to see you all, see new faces, and those folks that we know. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Take good
Thanks so
care.
much. Bye.